here is part 2 to my 2017 NFL season team recaps. In the last episode, I talked about the Browns, Giants, Texans, Colts, and Broncos. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about, in order, the New York Jets, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Chicago Bears, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Oakland Raiders. So let's get this underway. So we get this started with the Jets. And going into the season, we thought they were going to be the worst team in the league and would run away easily probably with the number 1 overall pick. And starting the year off, they were 0-2 and looked like that was going to be the case. But then all of a sudden, they went on to win 3 in a row and tied the Bills and Patriots at the lead in the AFC East. And of course, they almost beat the Patriots the next week and could have gone 4-2. And in fact, after that 0-2 start, the next 7 games, they were all within a score. So the Jets could have theoretically maybe been 7-2 to start the year. But of course, that didn't happen. They still ended up finishing 5-11, matching their record from last year, which no one would expect happen. Even the Giants did worse than the Jets, which I was even more stunned by. So although it was a 5-11 record, it's a good 5-11. Although if you look at the stats, they still were pretty bad across the board. And Todd Bowles, luckily for him, was good enough to manage to get an extension, but of course, he can't do no 5-11 next year. The Jets got to massively improve if he wants to have any shot in staying after 2018. So what do the Jets need to do? Because the AFC East is, as always, outside the Patriots, is wide open for one of the other 2 teams to make the playoffs, and the Dolphins are mediocre, the Bills are terrible, so if the Jets get their shit right, they can be right back in the mix and take a playoff spot like the Bills did this year and the Dolphins did in 2016. First, most importantly, they gotta finally get that franchise quarterback. And unfortunately for the Jets, they're pretty much way too high of a draft pick to get one of those top 2 QBs, most likely. So they might have to stick with Josh McCown, but the problem is he's going to be up there in age, and who knows if he's even going to come back. Not to mention, he isn't going to be a world beater either. So there's maybe 2 options the Jets should do, even though I'm not really a fan of it. They might have to be also in the market, like I said in my last video with the Broncos, in trying to get Kirk Cousins or someone else in to fill in that void and maybe eventually soon find that franchise QB. And another thing they maybe should do is maybe in the 2nd or 3rd round or later other rounds, finally find maybe a gem of a QB that maybe, just maybe, could be that franchise guy, because until they find that, they're not going to go anywhere. And for the love of God, don't pick a defensive player first as your first pick for like this 8th year in a row, for God's sake. Start taking care of that offense too. Now, unlike the 5 teams I did in the last video where I thought, although they were terrible, they have a lot of things going for them that might be to make a rebound year in 2018, I don't really see that with the Jets. At the best case scenario, unless they have a really good draft, I think the best case scenario, they're going to finish around 5-11, or worst case, they'll actually regress. So I don't really expect much for the Jets. But hey, at least they managed to surprise everyone this year by being 5-11, not going to like 2-14 or even worse we all thought they were. But of course, that might have hurt them in the end to avoid getting that first overall pick to get a QB. Next up is the Buccaneers. And of all the teams in the NFL, this is, in my eyes, probably the most disappointing team in 2017. I mean, they finally improved to 9-7. They were right there in the mix to make a playoff appearance last year if it wasn't for a tiebreaker against the Lions. And I figured, well, that offense looks good with Jameis Winston. That defense looked pretty good last year. I didn't trust pretty much anyone in the NFC South to really give them a challenge. I thought not only were they going to make a playoff appearance and win the NFC South, but I thought they were going to be such a competitive force in the NFC South that they might get enough wins to possibly challenge for a first round bye this year. And of course, they started off 2-1 looking good. And even after in that loss against the Patriots on Thursday night, other than those missed field goals, they still looked pretty good. But then they would go on to lose 4 straight in a row. They tried to recover. They won 2 in a row. But then they lost all their games except for the season finale against the Saints to finish a very disappointing 5-11 record. And wow, when you look at the stats, 18th in points scored, they were 9th in yards yards offensively. They had the 4th best passing offense in the league, but look at that run game. 27th. My God, no wonder they were passing so much, because they couldn't run the goddamn ball with Doug Martin. And don't get me started on that defense. I mean, look at this. This is probably the worst defensive team so far I've covered. 22nd points allowed. They were the worst team in yards allowed and passing yards allowed, and they were 23rd against the run. Jesus Christ. Everyone was passing and getting a whole bunch of yards on them, and they couldn't stop anyone for anything that was worth it. So what on earth went wrong with the Buccaneers? Well, Jameis Winston, of course, missed a bunch of games to injury, and of course, he just really was not the same at all. Both he and Mariota, the 2015 first top 2 picks, were really not good at all this year. Doug Martin absolutely shit the bed, as he's been consistently inconsistent throughout his years. And they really got to get that fixed. And of course, that defense really hurt them there. And you got to wonder if Dirk Cutter, their coach, might be on the hot seat going into next year, because after going 9-7 and now going 5-11, and of course being brought in when they should not have fired Lovie Smith after he had his 4-game improvement. So the Buccaneers in the draft, there's a couple things they need to think about. One, they gotta get a running back that actually can play and perform, unlike Doug Martin, and is cheaper since they owe him a lot of money. They gotta get another wide receiver, because guess what? Deshaun Jackson and Pierre Garçon, who they brought in, they're up there in their 30s, and they're going to be wanting a lot of money probably, so you need someone more younger and cheaper to complement Mike Evans. You got to hope the god Jameis Winston can stay healthy and actually perform like he did in 2016. And, oh my God, I really don't know what to say about that defense. That is just absolutely terrible. It needs to, probably get completely overhauled. But next year, it's quite difficult to figure out what's going to happen with the Buccaneers, because, as we saw this year in the NFC South, 3 of the teams went to the playoffs, and all 3 of them won 10 or more games, and the Buccaneers were the seller in that division. So I don't think that's going to happen again next year. I don't think we're going to have all 3 of them make it to the playoffs. Some one of those teams is going to fall. I just don't know who. And there's a good argument for either one of them. Or maybe they'll all be back in and the Buccaneers will still be in the cellar perhaps. So the NFC South is going to be very interesting next year. I'm just not sure what I'm going to say about the Buccaneers. Are they going to continue to be this terrible? Or are they going to finally bounce back in 2018 and make a playoff run like they honestly should be? And if they don't improve dramatically, Dirk Cutter should be fired, and you gotta start wondering, is Jameis Winston really the future franchise quarterback that we all thought he was, or maybe it was just 2016 was just a fluke? Next on the list is the Bears, who did a really head-scratching decision I thought of in the draft when they drafted Mitchell Trubisky, and I figured, oh boy, here we go again. At least they finally replaced Cutler, but is he gonna be the right man? And of course, they didn't start him at the beginning of the year before. After 4 weeks, I think they finally started him. And halfway through the season, they were at 3-5, and their defense was playing really good. They were doing really good at home. They were really home team you gotta watch out for when you visit them. I figured maybe they could finally start turning around, but nope. They went on to lose 4 in a row. They ended up finishing 5-11, which still is an improvement from last year, but still not good enough to save John Fox's job, as he was fired after they lost to the Vikings. And they brought in Matt Nagy, who was the offensive coordinator for the Chiefs, I think, the last few years. So it's a little head-scratching move. And, of course, at least for them, they still got Vic Fangio under contract, which was good. They need to have him on. That defense has dramatically turned around from last year. And that's going to be their main strength going to the next season. As you see, their stats, they're top 10 in pretty much everything except for the run defense, which is still a solid 11th place. So they're right up there in terms of strength, but that offense, though, is their weakness, as always, for the Bears. 29th in points scored, 30th in yards, 32nd in passing yards. They were the worst passing team in the league, and their running game, which is their best strength, that was just tapping at the middle point of the teams. So yeah, that offense was not really so good. And for the Bears, going into the 2018 draft, there's only one thing they need to do. They need to draft as many weapons as possible and throw them at Mitchell Trubisky. Because you got the defense, but you don't have the offense. And you have no receiver really much whatsoever. How the fact that no wonder it's a surprise how they were last in passing yards. You need a number one wide receiver on this team, and you need to probably honestly draft maybe a couple wide receivers. That should honestly be your first overall pick, though, even though Jeff, I think he said he wanted them to take a linebacker first overall pick. You need some weapons to give Mitchell Trubisky, or else he's going to bust out, and you're going to be in the exact same position you were under Jay Cutler. Now, if they do that, the Bears could be kind of scary in 2017. I mean, I think the Packers are going to bounce back if they have Aaron Rodgers. The Vikings, they might fall off a bit, but they still would probably be a playoff team. The Bears can position themselves maybe to take a leapfrog back over the Lions since they're mediocre as hell. So, the Bears, if they can get their shit right in the draft, they could set themselves up as a solid team next year, maybe a playoff team if they're lucky in 2019. So we gotta watch out for them, but they need to focus on everything possible to get as many weapons for Mitchell Trubisky, or it's not going to mean anything. Next up is the 49ers, and wow, what a difference the first and second half of the season it was. I thought after because remember the 49ers were 2-14 last year. They were the second worst team in the league in terms of record. And we didn't think they were going to do much at all, especially since they didn't have that franchise quarterback. And, of course, they brought in Kyle Shanahan to be their coach. And, of course, the 49ers start off, to probably no one's surprise, 0-9, which was the worst start in franchise history. And I think right before that ninth loss, or somewhere near the middle of the season, they made that very head-scratching decision at first, and they traded for Jimmy Garoppolo. And I was like, 49ers, what are you doing, you idiots? You're giving up, I think it was a second-round pick or first-round pick. Oh, my God, if you gave up a first-round pick, that would have been really stupid. But I'm not quite sure. But you gave up a high pick for the Patriots backup, who's getting close, I think, to like his 30s, and you're one of the worst teams in the league. You were still winless, I believe. You're in the position challenging the Browns to get the number one overall pick, and you're going to get a quarterback for the future? What the fuck was that about? But, of course, they won, then they lost the game. Now they're at 1-10. They made Garoppolo the starter, and holy shit, this team completely turned around. They won 5 in a row to finish the year, and they scored, I think it was 28 points on average in that 5-game winning streak. It completely turned that offense around. As you see, they were 20th in scoring, 12th in yards, 9th best passing offense in the league. Of course, that running game still is terrible because Carlos Hyde is always inconsistently injured, and that defense still has some problems to deal with. Although I think their defense played a little bit better during that 5-game win streak too, so those stats might not be necessarily an indicator. Now, of course, everyone's probably thinking, well, with the Cardinals, I think, are going to shit the bed next year. I think the Seahawks are going to struggle, but still remain where they are right now. Everyone's touting the 49ers. They'll challenge the Rams next year and maybe win the NFC West next year or make a playoff run. Yuzzah! And I got to say, whoa, hold your damn horses. Your defense is still terrible. Jimmy Garoppolo wasn't awesome. He was just solid, not awesome. So don't get so much hype on him yet. Let's wait and see what happens in the draft and the preseason stuff like that. So let's not crown them as teams that are going to be on the rise yet. We gotta wait and see. But what does this team need to do in the draft to make sure they can be a possible playoff contender next year? They gotta get a running back. Carlos Hyde has a talent, but he's always injured, is always inconsistent. They need someone to replace Frank Gore, which they have yet to do. And they gotta fix that defense too, and hopefully for them, get some health back on too, since a couple of their defensive players went out for season-ending injuries like right at the beginning of the season. So maybe if they come back healthy, maybe that defense can improve a bit. But they also do need to probably draft on defense too, and maybe get an extra weapon for Jimmy Garoppolo to use. So it started off as expected terrible, but the 49ers turned it around at the end of the season. It was a pretty impressive turnaround. Well needed for them, and we'll see what happens in 2018. I'm not going to be fully sold that, they're going to make the playoffs, but the trajectory looking really good for them. They at least made the very risky move bringing in Garoppolo, and he turned out at least okay. Now, if he can become that dominant franchise quarterback, then that trade will be an unbelievable steal, and the 49ers could be in good position for the future. But until then, we'll have to wait and see. And last up in this video is the Raiders, who everyone crowned this year as a Super Bowl contender and will knock off the Patriots and Steelers and make it there and get a title for Oakland before they move to Vegas. Yeah, I didn't really buy it. I'm not going to say they were the most overrated team in the AFC. I think the Dolphins were much more overrated, but I thought the Raiders were not at all a title contender. I mean, their defense was terrible. Derek Carr, remember, broke his leg last year, so who knows what would happen to him if he'd be able to come back at full strength. And of course, do you remember the schedule they had to play this year? Holy shit, that was probably one of the toughest that any team had to deal with this season. There was no way in hell that they were going to make a Super Bowl run. I was surprised. I mean, I was expecting them to barely maybe make into the playoffs because the schedule was going to be that tough and that defense was going to be terrible. But they brought in Marshawn Lynch. I thought, that'd be interesting. Maybe that offense could be a little bit more balanced and give a lot of pressure off of Derek Carr's back. So they start off the year 2-0. Not really much of a surprise there. But then they got destroyed and embarrassed by the Redskins on Sunday night. I remember when Derek Carr did that first huge play, like within a minute of the game when it was a pick. I knew right then that game was not going to go right. And it didn't. They got destroyed. And then they went on to lose 4 in a row. And they really just did not really recover that much back then. They went for like a period where they would win a game and then lose a game. But 12 weeks left in the season, they turned it around somewhat. They're 6-6. They tied the Chiefs and Chargers for the AFC West title. So even though the schedule's not going to be easy for them, for fuck's sake, they had to play 3 of their 4 games on the road, but they're still right there in the mix to win the AFC South and still maybe get a playoff spot in the wild card round. But the Raiders absolutely shat the bed. They lost all the remaining games to finish a disappointing 6-10, which I didn't expect. And Jack Del Rio got fired at the end of the year, which was to my surprise as well. And then to my unbelievable shock, they brought back John Gruden after 16 years away after they fucked him over when they should have just gave him his long-term contract instead of trading him to the Buccaneers, which they did. And of course, that's going to be highly cautious, I would say. I'm not like overtly optimistic. Now, he is an offensive guru. He can pass the ball a lot, which would be very good for the Raiders, but is he going to fix that defense? No. And his track record with the Buccaneers, that was because of Tony Dungy and Monte Kiffin, their defensive coordinator. He really had nothing to do with that defense. So until you fix that defense, more importantly, you're not going to get that far. And of course, that 10-year contract for $100 million? Jesus Christ, that is unbelievable amount of money you're throwing at him. You better hope he makes it worth it, like makes a immediate playoff run or maybe a Super Bowl run in the next few years, or else that's going to be a major financial burden. So in the 2018 draft, one thing, the Raiders need to get a running back, because who knows if they're going to bring back Marshawn Lynch or if he'll retire or not. They need to have a good running back to complement that offense and not give so much pressure to Derek Carr, because you don't want him to be the Matthew Stafford of the AFC. You probably need to find another offensive weapon for him too, since who knows if you'll bring back Michael Crabtree. And most importantly of all, they got to fix that defense, especially that secondary. What was it, like 12 weeks into the season before they finally got their first interception? That was terrible. You gotta fix that immediately. Only thing you got on that defense is Khalil Mack, for God's sake. You need more than that. And if they don't fix that defense and get a running game going, they're pretty much going to be exactly where they are right now. So this upcoming draft is going to be very important for the Raiders. And if they want to make a Super Bowl run, especially to give Oakland one last hurrah before they go to Vegas, they got to get this shit right. Because they can still maybe be in the mix in the AFC West with the Chiefs and Chargers, and maybe if the Broncos come back up to challenge and win that division, or at least maybe make a wild card appearance. Because those wild card appearances in the AFC are completely wide open. The AFC's weak the last bunch of years. So if they get their shit right, maybe they can make a playoff run next year. But this was a disappointing season, even worse than I thought, and they did not match the hype, which I didn't think they were going to. thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed. Leave your thoughts in the comments and such, as that was part 2. And next video, which hopefully will be tomorrow, I'll talk about the next 5 teams, which will be the Dolphins, Bengals, Redskins, Packers, and Cardinals. So see you then.